welcome to a brand new podcast from two of your favorite boys on the internet. This is Region Free. I'm AJ, and I'm joined by the lovely Blake Hester.
God, it's great to talk to you again after all these years. We haven't talked since our last podcast went off the air like a car on fire off the side
rails,
of a cliff. Yeah. Like, you know, no surviving members of that podcast. But it's great to finally see you again, AJ. How have you been
you as well.
Many years.
It's been about 2 years-ish since the last time I saw you, spoke to you. It seems like you've collected a lot more toys, little robots on your desk. But we don't have to get into that today because that's not what we're talking about.
I actually have 3 on my desk right in front of me, but the rest are behind me on my bookshelf.
That was a really unfair thing for me to say because it's like you do have very cool Gundam toys. I don't want to call them toys, model kits.
They're not,
that take a lot of effort to build, put together, paint, construct, and I've just got goofy ass like amiibo.
Well, I don't paint them.
You don't?
I don't paint them. No. The plastic comes pre-colored. See, like you can paint them. I'd like to start, but that's expensive. And believe it or not, I don't make much money at my salaried job at one of the biggest magazines on the planet.
Look,
but that's neither here nor there.
That's neither here nor there. We used to talk about video games very broadly, in theory, on a podcast, much like this one that will never be named. But Blake, Hester, and I have embarked on a project that is essentially bringing our text message conversations to life here over the internet. That's sort of the genesis of this podcast, is you and I.
Well, I would hope we wouldn't bring those text messages to life because it'd be episode 0. These boys canceled.
Yeah, 50% of the things that we talk about, roughly, which are films, movies, the cinematic arts, cool Blu-rays that we've bought from strange and curious corners of the internet.
Or the
world. Because this is a podcast called Region Free. The name we decided on a year and a half ago and have been talking about starting for forever. And now, here we are. Episode 0.
That's great.
You got anything to say about that?
No, I think it like the idea was because here's the thing: if there's one thing there's too much in the world, it's podcasts.
That's right.
If there's one thing in the podcast world there's too much of, it's video game and movie podcasts. But
100%.
You know, like I've listened to your podcasts, not your podcasts, which I think
I don't have any.
But I mean to the broader podcasting world. I've heard your podcasts. I've heard your big pictures, if you will, and all great shows in and of themselves, but we have no desire to make a show about whatever newest blockbuster is coming out. That world is covered, but I feel like there is a bit of a glut, not a complete lack of, but a slight glut of podcasts talking about maybe off the beaten path movies. You know, like we call it Region Free because often we had to get a Region Free Blu-ray player to buy the movies we like, watching Cult, Underground, stuff like that. So we thought, you know, we would throw our hats into the ring, make a show where we can talk about films that aren't your Avatar 2, The Way of Shape of Water.
The Way of the Shape of Water.
The Shape of Water to come.
Yeah.
But that movie's great. We all love it, but we don't need to talk about it on a podcast. However, The Adventures of Denchu-Kozo, as is the angle of this episode 0. You know, there's not too many pods out there talking about it, or maybe the work of Shinya Tsukamoto at large. There's, of course, a couple, but I think more voices talking about the stuff is always good.
I should have typed it into Spotify or Apple Podcasts or whatever my podcatcher of choice is, but I don't know how many episodes about this little film have come out in a while. And so
An important thing to note is AJ and me both have actual recording microphones, which is a huge difference between us and other cult podcasts, which sound like they record it on a
it's part of the experience. You know, you want to watch a film that feels like a VHS tape you found in the woods some days, and it has the exact same audio visual qualities.
Yeah, and you want to listen to a podcast where 2 white guys discuss it, where they record it on a Motorola Razr.
Exactly.
You know, like, we have luckily invested in good microphones to talk about good movies.
Yeah, that's right. I think, you know, I was sort of thinking about this a little bit earlier today, and it sort of is like almost, it's as if we were, programming our sort of own little film festival, or as if we had an imaginary movie theater in our minds, films that we'd want to show or expose to people or elevate to another level of like, hey, why isn't this talked about more? Here we are talking about it. We're going to put in the work, do the effort, and sort of, just examine these little curios or fascinating films from all sorts of corners of the world. And so the idea is taking things that are traditionally underseen, underdiscussed, not paid much attention to, or sort of forgotten to time, and digging them up and examining them and chatting about them here in the beautiful year of 2023.
And for episode 0, not quite a proper episode.
That's right.
We picked a short film for short episode, an introduction, which is... you know what? Here's the thing I was thinking about is like, I do feel like in 2023, there's not a ton you can really say about the masterworks or the opuses of Shinya Tsukamoto. Of course, the director of Tetsuo, the Iron Man, his most defining work, not his first work, as we'll talk about. I don't think there's too much to add in terms of the conversation around him as a director, except for Denchu-Kozo, which I feel like is secretly maybe his best movie.
Kind of very cool.
Yeah, despite being clearly the work of people who have no clue what they're doing from a filmmaking, writing, editing, and every other artistic standpoint, it still stands. In my mind, I think it's better than Tetsuo, which I think is a fine film in its own right. But like, there is something so unabashedly fun about this movie that even on a rewatch, when I knew all the beats, I was still hooting and, dare I say, AJ, hollering.
Did you let out one singular holler?
I was okay. So like my partner was here while I was watching it. And I had headphones on, so she couldn't hear what was happening. Also, she doesn't speak Japanese and didn't have the subtitles in front of her, so she couldn't hear what was happening. But like I was just laughing intermittently, and she'd be like, "What are you doing?" I'd be like, "I'm enjoying cinema. What are you doing?"
I'm going on a little adventure with a man called Denchu-Kozo. I guess a boy, really. He's quite young, and
it's the electric pilot. I think So this is weird. I think Denchu-Kozo translates to electric rod or electric pylon, but the title of the movie is like
Electric Rod Boy.
Yeah, I don't know why the title of the movie is often like in half English, half Japanese, because my version of it, which is the Arrow release, is the Adventures of Denchu-Kozo.
Yeah, I watched it online, and the sort of title that I was given was Denchu-Kozo no Boken, which I imagine is the Adventure of Denchu-Kozo in the original Japanese. But you sort of hinted at it, and it's laid there out in the title. Do you want to give us as succinctly as you can, Blake Hester, the sort of one sentence summary of what exactly this movie is about?
Oh, sure. It's about a kid who has an electric rod growing out of his back, and also the owner of a fine time machine who is bullied a lot and likes a girl who kicks the ass of the bullies. He then goes forward in the future and fights some vampires. That's it.
I mean, that's it.
What more do you need?
Yeah, 47 minutes roughly. And I had read that little log line, and you imagine, as you would, a sort of 3-act structure set out there from the premise of that film. I believe it's about 90 seconds in, he's traveling through time already. There's no minute wasted in this beautiful film from Shinya Tsukamoto. The thing, I guess, to start with, and this is something that translates through all of the stuff I've seen from him as well, but just the sheer impressiveness of how scrappy and resourceful you can tell it was to make this movie. This is 87, right? It's a few years before Tetsuo, and it's kind of the like second film he's ever worked on, the longest and one would presume highest budgeted thing, but it's essentially him and some of his friends from, what's it called, Kaiju Productions, right? The kind of like theater troupe that they had organized in Japan, and they're starting to just, make these experimental little short films. And it's very interesting to see all of the stuff here that he starts figuring out that is, you could say perfected or sort of more realized in a film like Tetsuo, which is about 15 minutes longer, but kind of has a much more traditional scale and scope to it, and in all its considerations and cinematic trappings. This one feels way more exciting and kind of not in its subject matter, but just like you can feel the film being stitched together as you're watching through it and see the boundaries and creative limits that they're running up against and trying to figure out. And I love little objects like that are just sort of real fascinations, knowing where his career goes and kind of what he's going to make next.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is like a crucial rewatch, and at this point it's like a fairly accessible movie. It's not hard to buy or watch, but like I think it is a crucial rewatch with Tetsuo. Watch Tetsuo first, then watch Denchu-Kozo, because they're like directly analogous. You know what I'm saying? Like, down to the cast is nearly the exact same. Like Tsukamoto's in it, Kei Fujiwara is in it, Nobu Kanaoka is in it, and then Tumaruo Taguchi is also in it. Which is like a lot of the central cast in Tetsuo, but also a lot of the visual flares of Tetsuo. You think about how they travel through the city streets and that, which is often like shot very like stop motion. There's a lot of stop motion animation. Very jittery. Yeah. It feels like he is learning how to do it here so that he can do it with Tetsuo, which not the like most well-crafted movie in the world, and it impossibly impressive film, but like, you know, it feels like he's kind of sanding off the rough edges here and figuring out how to do what he maybe ultimately wants to make. And he's also, crucially, this is a comedy. It's a like screwball slapstick comedy, which feels like a good answer to Tetsuo, which is super not funny. It's super bleak
and strikingly erotic, which there are flashes of that in this film, because at the end of the day it is sort of about, you know, a little schoolboy trying to impress his lady friend.
Sure.
But and you know, vampires are sort of, they show up somewhere in there, and that's an inherently sexual creature. Some people like to say you're sucking blood, you're seducing folks.
I wrote down twice, Miss Fujiwara, please DM me.
Yeah,
so you know what I was thinking about the sensuality of this film.
This was filmed at her apartment, so you know where it is. You could go find it.
She doesn't still live there. Kei Fujiwara has a really interesting history that, as someone who has never met or talked to her, I assume she doesn't mind me telling to podcast listeners. Apparently, she these days lives deep in the remote mountains of Nakano, running a like cat cafe. Like, she adopts cats and like runs a cat shelter and does her own theater troupe. They also do shows there, which is Oregon Presents, I believe. Oregon Vital is her theater troupe, but she's
good.
She's off doing that, and so no longer lives in that apartment in Tokyo, unfortunately. But I recently heard if you can make it to her house in the mountains, she will lodge people that will come there to see productions that Oregon Vital's doing. And I don't think I can get Game Informer to fly me out to do that, but it might be a fun personal trip one day.
Yeah, that would be very cool. I went to a cat cafe yesterday, actually, and because my neighborhood Dunkin' Donuts was closed, and I expected there to be cats running all around that thing, and they had them locked up behind a glass door in a different room, which is not traditionally what a cat cafe I would assume to be.
I have not gone to any animal cafe, but I would go to Kei Fujiwara's cat cafe. Which, let's talk about this now. Obviously, she has a role in the film, and she has a very central role in Tetsuo. Not the first person to point this out, but similar to the original Halloween, John Carpenter getting a lot of credit over Deborah Hill. Kei Fujiwara was like the creative anchor to early Shinya Tsukamoto. They ultimately had a falling out on Tetsuo. This is all well documented. You can look it up. But I do feel like after learning that about Tetsuo, you can watch Denchu-Kozo and be like, oh, this has her handprint all over it in terms of like special effects, the costume designs.
Yeah.
Obviously her fucking apartment being in it. But like,
well, yeah, that's part of what feels so scrappy and probably inherently collaborative in this thing, where you get the sense that it is, even more so than Tetsuo, just like, you know, a group of, I guess they're sort of fresh out of college students, but like just
Shinya Tsukamoto was 27 when he made this.
Yeah, I'm 27 right now. I've not made the Adventures of Denchu-Kozo.
He was significantly older than you might expect watching this when they actually got together and made it.
Yeah, some of the things, kind of with what you were talking about there as well, you can see some of the stylistic choices in this that start to get acclaimed and like are beloved in Tetsuo, where you might, it sort of makes you take a step back and think like, how much of that was explicitly intentional by design? Now Tetsuo is a film that's been dissected and sort of talked about and looked at under a number of angles, and the elements that are interesting and unique in it have been pulled apart for years and years and years. But the benefit of something more underseen like Denchu-Kozo, you watch and you see some of the things like the jittery stop motion sequences of people running across and these weird constructions of sort of cyberpunk transhumanity being imagined with all of these pillars and things coming out of them, and it feels more, I don't know what the word is here, but kind of like happenstance, almost as if it created out of necessity and limitations of budget and the reality of the scope of this project, versus you watch something like Tetsuo and you're like, the genius is here on the screen. All of that was clearly designed. It enhances, like, the next time I watch Tetsuo, I'm going to have this stuff in mind and think about how that process sort of developed over time.
But it also feels like a movie made by someone who has a command of filmmaking from an artistic sense, but not yet a technical sense. Because, like, this movie feels, as rough as it is, like, so inventive. I think about, there's one shot in particular during one of the kind of showdowns between the vampires and Denchu-Kozo and his sensei he finds, this older woman that kind of is teaching him how to fight back against these future vampires. There's a moment where there's kind of a close-up shot on her, and one of the vampires rushes in, and it feels really like it feels like there's this interesting fluid animation to it, which is like weird for a movie that's filmed on probably a camera they found in the garbage. Yeah. And if you pause it and go frame by frame, you learn that they spliced in 6 frames of Tsukamoto's character in different parts of the screen to make it look like he's running in and circling around her. And it's literally like exactly 6 frames.
Wow.
And it like adds this entire, like, honestly, if I am reductive about it, it's like an anime aesthetic to it, but like it adds this like whole level of motion to the scene that it wouldn't have if he just kind of showed up or materialized. And it's like, that's incredibly impressive and inventive for someone who is clearly not entirely sure what they're doing. Like, it shows how smart he was before he actually knew how to do things.
At this time too, Tsukamoto's probably the early part of a generation of filmmakers who kind of could have had the experience of watching anime at a younger age, and then that influences their stylistic choices when they set out to make their own films. And so I think you see some of that in those choices. And then again, just the way motion overall is conveyed through this entire film, the like very fast cutting style, and a fast cutting style paired with very close intimate shots. Like, there's never really more than maybe 4 people in a frame at any given moment in this, but it's usually 1 or 2 people, and the action is very closed in, and you're getting this like very intimate sense of whether it's a fighting sequence or a dialogue sequence. Like, people are close together, and maybe that's because the rooms that they were shooting in weren't too big and they didn't have elaborate sets, but it kind of captures this just inherent frivolity and frenetic sense of everything that's happening in this movie.
There's also like, just even though a lot of the acting is pretty goofy,
think?
If not outright terrible, there's definitely like a camaraderie feel in a lot of this movie that I don't know how true it is. If any, we've learned that in Tetsuo destroyed a lot of these friendships. I don't know what the case might have been on Denchu-Kozo, but at least outwardly you feel like these are people who obviously were producing and creating together. Denchu-Kozo was I believe a theater production that Kaiju Theater was doing before they filmed it. Also, I do want to point out, I talked about this movie as if Tsukamoto had never picked up a camera before. I believe he used to shoot commercials before this.
Yeah.
I'm not going to teach you how to make a film by any means, but it's also like he had some level of like knowledge of how
and there's something things. Even shorter that predates this, in the name of which I'm forgetting, The Phantom of Regular Size, which was basically like they sort of went from filming that right into the filming of this. They were kind of a package deal, and they'd actually be screened together because they were both, or this was not long enough to like be screamed as its own film, and so to get it over the arbitrary hour limit or whatever to run in theaters, they paired it with that, which I think is like 15-20 minutes.
Did you think this movie was particularly like funny and well written? It's not particularly well acted, but like there's some hilarious moments in this movie.
Yeah, like our main character kind of looks like he's dressed like Shinji Ikari, but he's got this very suspicious and hard to ignore telephone pole sticking right out. It sort of juts out from between his shoulder blades, basically. And there's an entire comedic premise to be mined out of that, but this movie moves very quickly and gives you all you need to know up front, which is like, hey, if you were a schoolboy who had a telephone pole jutting out from between your shoulders, other teenagers would probably bully you and try to harass you and beat the shit out of you, which is basically how the film opens.
I wrote down in here that the pylon actor is a comedy legend.
Yeah,
he is so funny.
Someone's holding that thing, like swinging it around, knocking stuff over.
There's a moment that made me laugh so hard when he gets to the future and Sensei, the teacher he finds, is like, electric pylon boy, you must save the world. And he doesn't even think. His immediate response is, goodbye. Runs, tries to run off.
Yeah.
It's so funny.
Like, it really is that fast. The film opens, he's basically getting bullied. What's the character's name? May, right? Runs in, saves him. Classic sort of, begone, bullies. You teen boys, you fear femininity and any woman figure of authority, and that's basically the setup. And then it's like, thank you for saving the bullies for beating me up because of my pylon jutting out of my back. Here's this time machine, I think you should have it. Oops, I accidentally got sucked into it, which is a classic meet cute, like basic rom-com setup here.
Well, he's also like, hey, do you want to, like, thanks for helping, you can use my time machine if you want. And she goes, that's okay.
Look, you're walking your dog out in the park. You see someone in trouble. You help them out. They offer you to jump through their time machine. What are you saying?
No, bro. I saw Denchu-Kozo. It didn't work out too great.
Yeah. Even that initial sequence of going through the time machine is, again, maybe 2-3 minutes into the movie, but there's this kind of spiraling sense as he's running through it, and he does basically get sucked in. It's kind of meant to be a little jarring and a little intimidating, and the camera work of just kind of like, it feels like it's strapped to someone running through a street, but it's still kind of, it has that have you like the first Evil Dead or Evil Dead 2 where Raimi would like tape the camera to a shopping cart and then push it through the woods, that kind of shakiness and jitteriness to it, and it's a good way when you're strapped for money and resources to convey someone traveling through the eons of time, is just to do something with the camera that people maybe weren't used to seeing.
It seems like, okay, so effectively they're just doing stop motion with a lot of this stuff, right?
Yeah,
like
I would imagine.
Through the streets, those, like, you can watch and see just the sheer distance they are traveling. It must have taken God only knows how long to do all of these stop motion chase sequences, because it's like, it feels like a lot of them are like a mile long. Yeah, and just like shooting stop motion picture by picture that way. Can't imagine.
I watched the Guillermo del Toro Pinocchio, which is like a stop motion movie, and there's like a behind the scenes featurette on Netflix with that. That's maybe better than the movie itself, but it's Guillermo del Toro like walking around the workshop they used to film that, and he's like, here's the Pinocchio dolls we had. This one's huge because when he's talking to a character who's smaller, like, we had to make one that big. And you watch it and you're like, it's incredible and amazing that they did this. But like, my first question, how did you do this? My second question, why do we let people get away with this madness? Because it looks cool and it's awesome, but like, it is so time and labor intensive. And even here too, they didn't have Netflix money when they were making this thing. They didn't have big old dolls.
What do you think the budget, like realistically? 1980 what? What was this? 87? What do you?
Maybe they're shooting it in 86.
How much money do you think they put into this? Like, I would assume Tetsuo, everyone involved, like, liquidated their bank accounts. Like, here's my life savings. But like, what do you think was put here?
I imagine that this one's like okay, you guys have an idea? Here's $100, $100 to $250. And I know it would be yen, and I know it would be about 30 years ago. So inflation, the change of money, whatever.
Well,
but like,
hold on. That was the bubble economy.
oh, okay. So like 2-3 million, probably more.
Yeah,
so.
probably. Yeah. That's what most theater troops were bringing in during the economic miracle.
Okay, so you want to make a movie where a guy goes to the future and fights vampires. Well, I'm not really seeing the potential there. We've got those are a dime a dozen. If he had something, a sort of menial object growing from his body that's never really explained and is only used as a convenience in the plot, I think now I see, I got dollar signs in my eyes. I'm seeing something there.
It feels like a $5 million movie for sure. But that's just factoring in the era and inflation.
Yeah. I don't know how the budget would compare to something like Tetsuo, and if there was more like sign off. I don't know the entire kind of production timeline of that film, but it definitely feels like something that had a bit more support, whether internally or externally. I feel like a lot of the, you could call them stunts, VFX, whatever you want to in this movie. They look, about as good as the stuff in Tetsuo. And so that's just the innate like talent and kind of resourcefulness we've been talking about in this crew. Like,
I think the only thing that doesn't look as good as Tetsuo is, one, the restoration on this film.
Yeah.
Like, it has probably just been too far lost at this point to ever get something that looks as good as the 4K cuts of Tetsuo. Two, also, like, it just feels like it's filmed on cheaper film stock.
Definitely.
But other than that, like, it does, to your point, feels like visually comparable in terms of the effects and stuff like that.
The contrast, the inkiness, the visual style of like the black and white in Tetsuo definitely helps that. I feel like that could have maybe worked here as well, because it's not like, I think the blood effects don't look particularly great. There's a lot of them that are like, you might have just smeared some ketchup there or done a nice little, the splatters and everything look fine. But once there's like a scene towards the end, and again, you're dealing with vampires, there's a scene toward the end where someone has a lot of blood on their face at once. And I'm like, that, the splatter, the pattern there is way too cleanly kind of painted on for it to ever feel organic. Maybe the ketchup was organic, but the blood splatter, not. It
does not stand up to other Japanese splatter films of the time, and certainly not after.
Yeah, but that's not what their priority was,
clearly. As a scholar of Japanese splatter, this movie does not stand the test of time.
Low tier effort there, at the very least. So what happens when our man gets to the future? You want to talk us through that?
Fuck, why would you ask that? It's so hard to explain any plot point in this film in a coherent or sensible.
Yeah, well, this one was your idea, so I'm saddling you with that responsibility. You've seen it more times than I have.
I mean, he gets to the future, and essentially, here's the thing: even if you're taking that drug from Limitless, following the plot of this movie is impossible. But essentially what happens is he goes to the future and he meets a elderly woman, even though it's implied it's only 25 years in the future, but we'll get to that point later. And at some point about a decade before this new point in time, vampires and this, I guess it's kind of like a weapon that they have, Adam Jr. or Adam Special, something like that. Vampires have used this weapon they had to kind of take over the world, shroud the earth in darkness, and enslave humanity. And we start to learn that pylon boys are kind of these phenomena through history that show up when evil, or maybe just specifically vampires, need to be banished or relinquished from the world. Obviously, our pylon boy here, he is hesitant to help out. He immediately tries to run away, but he is eventually persuaded to fight back against the evils of this new era he's in, alongside his elderly woman he has found. There's an amazing training montage where, like, they're not even trying to make it look like they're doing real push-ups. It's very funny and very endearing. And then, the fight begins, and that's basically the rest of the film. And for film largely shot, I think, in one room and on maybe the sidewalk outside, the fights start to get kind of epic in proportions in this damn thing.
They're pulling vampires in from everywhere. I know you were afraid to do that, but I think you did a wonderful job. You set us up great.
You.
Yeah,
Thank you.
in summarizing the plot of this 47-minute movie,
I'm a film scholar,
which is half action probably.
I cannot explain, if you haven't seen this movie, how truly incomprehensible the story is.
It's all vibes based, yeah.
It's like, and it's not even a complicated story. It's just that it's not told in a comprehensible way. Like, the story is basically like, boy goes to future, fights vampires, goes back. But like, just
the character motivations, the relationships, all the nuance in there is definitely, it's not even lost. It's almost by design. It's not really there.
Yeah, it feels like it's written by someone who doesn't know how to write in any language.
Or it feels like a movie that they showed up when they were shooting it and was like, you know what would be cool? What if there was like a training sequence? Or what if...
in that sense, what does this have... What is different about this film than Casablanca, which was largely created on the set day of?
I was getting huge Casablanca vibes. Thank you for saying that. I was just like, you know what? This is exactly the same film.
I don't want to get political here.
Oh.
I think Casablanca is a great film. I really like Casablanca.
It's good.
I have no plans on ever revisiting that movie for the rest of my life.
It's good.
I think I'm going to watch Denchu-Kozo again with the Tom Mess commentary. But, like, am I going to watch Casablanca tonight? Fuck no. So there you
Get
go.
out of here, bogey.
Yeah, Humphrey, more like... I don't know.
Come on.
Let's move on.
No, take it home.
Humphrey, more like bum-ass-free.
There you go. I was like, there's a very easy setup for you right there.
He's rolling over in that fucking grave. Is he dead? He has to be.
Has to be. That'd be crazy if he wasn't.
I'll Google it, and if I don't say anything, listeners just assume he's dead.
Yeah, just assume. Like, it does move very quickly, this movie, and it is a little disorienting. Again, probably by design, because it is sort of doing... I'll tell you one classic movie that's not Casablanca that I did sort of feel a kinship to this film with. That would be a little motion picture called The Matrix, which, Shinya Tsukamoto, obviously one of the godfathers, grandfathers. I'm not sure what the paternal relationship is there, but he's often attributed as an early pioneer of cyberpunk filmmaking, right? Mm-hmm. This one, there are some clear cyberpunk themes, though maybe less so than something like Tetsuo. I think the sort of groundwork for entering a new, unfamiliar world that kind of has these wacky and weird technological advancements is all in there. And I think the future that this film imagines, however limited and sort of small in scale it is something really fascinating and kind of like, once you get there out of that initial tunnel of time travel, as we've called it, that really cool sequence we were describing with the running and the stop motion jittery photography, it's definitely something where you land and it's not like, we're going to sit here and explain the rules for a while and get you up to speed, the viewer, because it's like, this new fantastical world we've imagined with all of these crazy rules. It's basically it has the brevity of the way you described it, Blake, which is like, hey, welcome to the future. Shit's kind of fucked. There are these vampires. Bad news. Good thing you've got the telephone pole growing out of you. We kind of need that. It's like very, oh, you're here now. Like, we've been waiting for this movie to happen for 25 years. You're here now. Let's have the rest of the movie.
Mm-hmm. And then it basically is just a testing ground for different visual experiments these six friends want to do, because it feels like every scene is an experiment in something different. Like a lot of the outside scenes are like them experimenting with how to composite two different pictures on top of each other to make cityscapes that look like they're enshrouded in these like cotton ball clouds, or how to make stop motion Play-Doh look like a character is melting. Like it quickly moves away from its plot for a while, as like the theater troupe here seems to be trying to pad out their resume with different visual experiments. They all look great. They all look
really cool. The final boss of this movie sort of emerges from a very weird metal cocoon, if you want to describe it that way. That was probably the effect in the movie where I sat up the most and I was like, that is new, and I've never seen anything that quite looks like that.
I also sat up in my chair and said, Miss Fujiwara, please be me.
I mean,
You are the love of my life.
divorced from that, it was a very impressive and compelling effect.
No. One of the effects around that character that is amazing is their death scene.
Oh yeah,
where you get kind of the silhouette of her body growing out of this mass of very Tsukamoto Fujiwara style, this mass of like metal and machinery and like organic substance. You basically see that completely fall apart and melt. The human components kind of melt away and leave kind of, it almost looks like a metal spine is left in there.
Yeah, like a Terminator.
Yeah, kind of. It's an incredibly impressive moment of like stop motion and like practical special effects, is like the death scenes that end up happening to these vampires and their weapon here, which is Adam Special or Eve. I'm not really sure.
Something like that. I've already invoked Evangelion, so I can't do it again.
Right.
The costumes, makeup, design of the vampires is all pretty neat. Like I was about to say the rest of the characters, but it's like basically the two school kids kind of, they look like school kids. And then there's like these very elaborate sort of robes with high collars and like complicated patterns on the vampires that gives them this otherworldly sense that, you know, again, we've talked about the probably very limited budget here.
You know what it is it's kind of a mix of not a visual K, which is like a fashion style born out of the 80s in Japan, which really looks like a lot of the like new wave goth scene that we had in America and Europe. You know, think about like people you might picture at a Joy Division or Depeche Mode or Cure show.
Yeah.
It really seems like they are adopting like 80, specifically, obviously, because this film was made in the 80s, but like the 80s style of visual K, and then just like being like, yeah, that's vampires now. Like it's kind of a fascinating touch that I really like. Like there's a punk or new wave aesthetic to this.
Yeah, there's one character I wish I had a picture sort of pulled up, but is wearing this like floral sort of overcoat, and the like contrast of the pattern, they're shooting against this kind of grayed out backdrop, whatever it was, but you know, they kind of are making things look like this hellish technoscape of the future. And so in sort of one of the primary fight scenes towards the end of the movie, it's like this crowd of vampires, again shot very tight, like very intense corridors, but this combat sequences, and then you've got these ornate sort of dark industrial costumes against this very like ambient backdrop, which could feel like very simplified and sort of not compelling, but when there's so much happening, again, you mentioned like in the foreground of these shots, it's like probably by design, but also maybe just a very cool trick of this movie that the like backdrops essentially fade away and like you're not even sure what's there.
Yeah. So we have our fight, and eventually
we have a lot of fighting. Yeah.
Good prevails over evil. There's some great moments.
As it always does, and as it does in the real world.
True. We have a great moment where our elderly teacher, a vampire is decapitated, and she dribbles his head like a basketball and shoots it into a small waste bucket. And but unfortunately, through events that we all remember, the teacher is injured, which leads to a really good visual gag of the head popping back out and laughing at her from the waste bucket. I really like that. She is injured and ultimately passes away. And Pylon Boy, in his grief, searches through this photo book she has to find out it is May, his love.
The twist of the century.
Ago. Absolutely astounding. He didn't recognize her.
Not two women in this movie, just the one.
She was the fucking spitting image of the character not 20 minutes before, just with some gray hair, but somehow that went over his head. And then we learn her missing husband, who has gone to the further future to fight other vampires, is in fact him.
Yeah. Which is a happy ending at the end of the day.
Yeah, well, and then at some point another electric pylon guy shows up. He's kind of just chilling there for a while, and then the Pylon Boy creates his like ultimate attack is just like a huge flash of light, which of course like the vampires are vampires, so it melts them, and good triumphs evil.
And then it sort of ends with him journeying through time once again, a sort of open-ended. Do you think maybe they should pick this one up 30-ish years later? Return to the well?
No. he goes back in time
Yeah.
to where May is, and he has that weird moment where he's like he's back. He makes it back to his time. He doesn't go back to the future, does he?
No. But like you sort of get a similar sequence where he's
yeah.
being pulled through and lands.
Okay.
Yeah.
His daughter does show up briefly and says that she's
Yeah,
fighting someone else. It seems, at the end of the day, it's an incredibly nihilistic film about war and the way humans perpetuate endless cycles of war, because apparently further into the future, his daughter is still fighting someone.
Yeah.
So it goes.
Nihilistic, but what's the word? Like, very, very jovial about it. Very sort of like, hey, war is going to go on forever. Let's have some fun while we're here.
Look, and here's the thing. They were right.
I don't disagree.
I mean, Japan hasn't been involved in any wars in the last, 70 years, right?
Unless I'm forgetting a big one now. I can't imagine,
What did you think overall?
Incredibly fun. Like, I think, our discussion is obviously centered around the very cool camera work, costumes, effects that are happening here. That's the most compelling bit of this film for sure.
Sure.
Like, Tsukamoto is such an interesting guy because, again, there's been so much kind of discussion and dissection of what makes his movies work and what makes them so singular. His influences are clear on a lot of, genre work and themes that people have pointed back to, that intersection of that cyberpunk theme of us modifying our bodies and at what point you stop becoming human and what point you start becoming a machine, the inherent sexuality of a film like Tetsuo. I don't think his visual styles are often imitated or even attempted to be replicated because they are so... I don't want to say he's the only one who can do that, but if you did some of the effects that you'd see in a film like Tetsuo, you'd be like, right, okay, I know where that came from. And
I agree with you. I do often wonder, Tsukamoto's a director that's been working now for 30 years professionally.
Mm-hmm.
No, maybe 40 years professionally. Yeah. And it often does feel like his style, and I'm not trying to dog on you, is boiled down to one or two movies. Not including Denchu-Kozo. It's like Tetsuo and Tetsuo 2. Tetsuo 2, bad movie. Don't watch it. But I actually think he is a much more interesting director beyond his early experimentations in cyberpunk. He's always been kind of interested in the body's place within cities and industry and how those things affect each other. But in terms of the experiments we see in Tetsuo, a little bit in Denchu-Kozo, it feels like those were often left in the 80s.
I haven't watched anything of his past Tetsuo 2.
Okay. So he ends up getting into some very different places in terms of contemporary living in Japan, kind of romance in Japan, or kind of just work-life culture in Japan through a lot more grounded films. A good one is Tokyo Fist, which I think maybe he did right after Tetsuo. Often pointed to as one of his best films. Bullet Ballet gets into... Yeah,
that's the one that I want to check out.
Yeah, that explores depression in Japan in some really interesting ways. And then he's since gone on to do feudal Japan films, and they always have a little bit of that flair. He'll have stop motion pop up occasionally in those movies. But I do think a lot of this style of Tsukamoto film was actually left pretty early in his career beyond broad themes of humans and cities.
It's easy to imagine something like Denchu-Kozo if there was more support behind it, or even if this idea was a smaller short film that then grew into something bigger. The holes that could kind of be filled in there with setting up maybe a bit more backstory of how this character fits into the world, and the school life or whatever is very economical by design and sort of by the nature of the thing. The parts in Tetsuo that are so fascinating compared to that too are the areas where they were maybe allowed to indulge some of that stuff a little bit more. And so I'm thinking of sequences like the subway station in Tetsuo, which is one of the standout moments for sure, where you have just more people and more I don't want to call it explicit commentary on society, but you're dealing with that a little bit more. And it's not just for its reputation and the way it is talked about, it is not just this psychedelic experiment. It is very much like a focused film with a thing to say and a lot of ideas that it's exploring. And so comparing that to this one, you know, it's like it's all there already, basically. Just you can feel the constraints of making this one pushing up against that.
So let's tell people where to watch this movie. I watched this in the Arrow box set that they put out of Tsukamoto's work, specifically the work Tsukamoto wrote and directed, so it doesn't have stuff like Gemini or Hiroko the Goblin, but it has 2 of the Tetsuo movies, Denchu-Kozo, Tokyo Fist, Killing, Kodako. It has a bunch of them. That's in this, but that's also expensive, maybe hard to get, maybe currently out of print.
It's AJ, at the time of recording, it's on sale on the Arrow website, but I doubt it will be when you're listening to it. But it's a good.
Pick it up.
You might be able to get it at Barnes & Noble. It's in my cart right now, I'm telling you that.
Pick it up. Where'd you watch it, though? Because you maybe have a more accessible link to it.
Well, I typed it into Google, and I looked through some of the video tabs, because I'm like, it is a 45-minute short film. It's probably on Vimeo or something like that somewhere. It's around on some Plex servers, if you can find it, I will say. Or, you know, maybe a website like vkvideo.com / and then pretend I'm saying a bunch of letters and numbers in there. But like it's not, and I think this is great, it is not sort of a lost film, lost time. It is pretty accessible, like we talked about. And it's absolutely worth watching if you have or have not seen Tetsuo, I would say. Like, they make a solid double feature that's maybe an hour and a half of your time. Hour 45, because Tetsuo is like 65 minutes, right?
Historically, this is a director that respects his viewer. Most of Tsukamoto's films, 90 minutes at max.
And here's the thing. Stuffed. Like, you know, this is 47 minutes. I was getting up from the very chair I'm recording this podcast, and I was like, that was a movie-ass movie I just watched. Let me log that on Letterboxd.
As we wrap up, a couple of things I'd like to do. First off, the soundtrack in this is...
Thank you. The music is so good.
I don't think it's the full soundtrack, but at least 2 of the songs, the credits song specifically, and there's one earlier, is by the band Bachi Kaburi.
Okay.
Buri, as we would say it in America. Bachi Kaburi, which is, this name always, Tomaro Taguchi, who is one of the vampires in this movie, also the lead in Tetsuo. It's his band.
That's awesome.
Yeah, they're really easy to find on YouTube. I don't know that they're on Spotify. If you also just Google Denchu-Kozo credits song, it'll pop up. Yeah. It'll show you how to type their name and help you Google it.
You talked a little bit about the humor earlier too. Mm-hmm. There's a great moment where the music is sort of used. There's a very good shift in the song that's playing, and you're like, okay, this is not all sort of serious, doom and gloom vampire cyberpunk future. They know maybe that the costuming and the sort of setup of this entire film is a little whimsical, and they're having fun with it.
Yeah, if you want to find, the credit song is so good, and I think a standout. It's their song "Only You." Might take a little creative Googling to get it to show up.
I think Denchu-Kozo credit song is the path there,
okay,
the
gotcha,
golden
cool.
way.
Second thing, AJ. Let's recommend 2 movies based on this for people to watch. They know how to watch this one.
Okay.
What are some good movies to watch that aren't just Tetsuo the Iron Man?
What are some good movies to watch? Related to this one, sort of
tangentially, thematically, whatever comes to mind.
Well, I mean, personally, the route I'm going down is I want to broaden my Tsukamoto horizons, and so I'm probably going to chase down something like Tokyo Fist or Bullet Ballet. Probably Bullet Ballet, I think, is my next step. What do you think?
Bullet Ballet is awesome. I think it's my favorite favorite Tsukamoto that isn't Denchu-Kozo. It's very much his take on Taxi Driver. Yeah, honestly.
I mean, I read the premise, which is guy kind of investigates the situation of the world after his girlfriend commits suicide and kind of goes on this spiral.
The early core conceit is guns are very hard to get in Japan, and he just wants to kill himself. And so you follow him for the first parts of the movie as he's just trying to figure out how to get a gun, which is a wild wild little narrative idea. But yeah,
I think it's also on the box set, but I'd love to see Phantom of regular size, which is the one thing he sort of made that predates this. It's not on the box set.
It's not. No. I've never seen that one.
I would love to track whatever that thing is down and find it, because like it was really a revelation to watch this with the foreknowledge of where his career goes and what he starts doing like immediately after this, and just see so much of it already here. It was like really just cool to witness that.
One movie I'm gonna recommend here. My first of two is Oregon by Kei Fujiwara.
Yeah.
Pretty easy, pretty accessible to watch. It is where her career goes. She only directed 2 films, Oregon and Id. Oregon is her first one. It's a whole mess. It's viscerally disgusting. It doesn't make a whole hell of a lot of sense, but I think I mentioned earlier how I felt like Tsukamoto kind of left a lot of this visual style he had with TETSUO, the first one specifically. And I think that's because a lot of it was actually Fujiwara. So when you watch something like Oregon, you start to see
whose fascination are whose, right?
Yeah, you start to be like, oh, the obsession with the flesh and kind of mutilating it or disfiguring it in very interesting ways. Oregon is obsessed with that, not in terms of like metal and flesh, but just like organic matter.
What can we do with a thing coming out of a body, crawling out from under some skin, kind of this gooey, fleshy, all the liquid bits, you know?
Exactly. It is a wet film, man.
Oh, okay. Hell
it's
yeah.
Cool. I think maybe it was Synapse put it out. Like it's easy to get. I bought it for like $10-15 or something.
Hell yeah.
At Grindhouse. You got a second one?
I got a second one. No, I think more Tsukamoto films.
Okay. Yeah.
That's my resolution.
I'll agree. Bullet Ballet. To see where that man's career is gonna go. Bullet Ballet. I think it was 2 movies after Tetsuo, and I feel like there's
almost a decade.
It feels like he followed the thread set by like Tokyo Fist and Bullet Ballet for a lot of his later career. Like Kodako kind of deals with similar weird anxieties and mental health stuff. Great director, great movies.
Yeah, cool guy. I would love to be friends with him.
Cool guy Tsukamoto, also an actor.
Yeah.
He's in Ichi the Killer as Gigi. Has the famous scene where he pulls off his jacket and he's just a buff dude. It's also in...
and it's clearly him. He got into shape for that.
That's right. He's also in Shin Godzilla.
Oh my god, who is he in that?
I've never seen Shin Godzilla. So
oh my god. Okay, well, we're going to talk about that on this eventually, I'm sure.
It's weird. It's hard. It's like impossible to stream with the original dialogue.
Yeah, there's like there's one Blu-ray that they published whenever that came out, but
I should just buy that.
You probably find it.
He's in that. He's in a bunch of other stuff.
I like ask who he is in that movie. He's probably a bureaucrat because the entire cast of that movie is bureaucrats, so he's probably one of the guys in suits.
If I had to guess, the majority of that man's livelihood actually comes from acting, because he's like maintained. He'll like take director for hire roles, but like when it comes to the movies you're thinking of that he did, those are movies he like self-funds himself and writes and directs. And so I feel like
there's not a lot of not a lot of big government funding for the sticky cyberpunk flesh movies he wants to make.
So he pops up as an actor more, I think, because he's trying to get that daytime drama money to fund his weirdo freak movies.
The Tsukamoto After Dark.
Dude, that man's a
That's
little
where
freak, if you ask me.
A little freak, yeah.
How tall do you think he is?
I'm sure the answer's out there, but yeah, I'm not. I wouldn't.
I'm gonna guess he's like Jacob Geller height, whatever that means to the listeners at home.
Putting him on blast in episode 0. I almost said 1, but it's not.
That's right.
Much like the Adventures of Denchu-Kozo, thank you for joining us for this, little experiment, first creative foray into a brand new podcasting effort here. Every week, subsequently, from here on out, we're going to be picking another movie sort of similar like this. Probably one you haven't seen, maybe haven't heard of, but with something we find really interesting and creative that we want to dig into and discuss and talk about. Blake, would you like to let people know what they can look forward to in the future?
The Horrors of Malformed Men.
One of the hardest titles a movie has ever had. Crazy cool setup, crazy cool premise. I have not watched it at the time of recording. That's another thing we want to do. We sort of want to bounce back and forth between movies we haven't seen, one of us hasn't seen, one that one of us really likes, something fascinating. So, come back each week. I'm sort of imagining this as a growing library of movies. You, the little viewer, can comb through and be like, that was a fun one. I want to dig into that a little bit more. Maybe just listen to us chatting about the movies we think are cool and hopefully broaden your own horizons. Because that's the goal of what we're doing here at the end of the day. We've spent a lot of time and money collecting these Blu-rays, reading through the knowledge of these hard to find and hard to see films. And hopefully, what we want to do is share that with you. So if you're hearing this, thank you for listening. And thank you for making it to the end of episode 0 of Region Free.
Only you.